So just for everyone who's joining, just making sure you're all in the right place. This is the training for the Drinking Water Online online platform for annual reporting on drinking water compliance.
Yep. And this is a Zoom webinar, not a Zoom meeting. It's slightly different, but there's people logging in will find that their actually microphones and videos are turned off. But please feel free to use the question, answer, and chat room, and we'll get to those either during the session if we can, or afterwards. I was sitting static around about in the high 97-ish. So welcome everyone. This event came about from a casual conversation that so I believe you're doing drinking water online training for drinking water assessors, and we thought it'd actually be good to do with the changes that are going on in the environment, to do one for end users as well. So this is how this sort of all came about. So the two people here in front of us is Michael and Chris. They're both from Beca, is it right, Chris?
Yep, that's correct.
Yep. And so you run the drinking water online for Ministry of Health. So I'll pass over to you, Michael, and floor's yours.
Well, it's really look, welcome. My name is Michael Howden. I'm with Beca, and I've been working on the Drinking Water Online project for over 4 years now. So look, it's really great that we can run this webinar. I know it's something we've talked about for a couple of years, and I guess one of the upsides of the COVID crisis is that I think everyone's a bit more familiar with running these webinars and web meetings. So really looking forward to going through this with you all today. I know sometimes we've really tried to engage with a wide range of stakeholders over the past couple of years. I know we haven't had a chance to talk to all of you because there's quite a lot of you out there who are using Drinking Water Online. We're really hoping that this will be a great way to share some of the work that we've been doing, get you up to speed if Drinking Water Online is not something you give a lot of time to until it comes to this sort of annual survey time. And really hopefully that can be a bit of a two-way dialogue. As Noel said, he's muted all your microphones. Sorry, it does mean that we don't have to put up with sort of random sounds throughout the training, but please do use the chat to ask any questions. We won't be able to answer everything now, but we'll certainly endeavour to over the next sort of weeks. If you've got suggestions as well, really it's a great way of us getting feedback from you. Without further ado, I'll actually, before I hand over to Chris, I would just like to say we've got Nicola Esson online from the Ministry of Health, who may be able to answer some of the questions. I'm pretty sure we've got a few Barry Manningly and Jan Powell online from ESR, so they might be able to answer some of those technical questions as well. Otherwise, we'll take those questions offline. So yeah, without further ado, handing over to you, Chris. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, cheers, Michael. Just to kind of reiterate on what you said, it's a session really taking you through Drinking Water Online, so it's really focusing on the tool, but we do have the subject matter experts here to answer some wider systems questions if you have them. I will share my screen and kick it off. So let's go here. Hopefully everyone can see that. So this session is aimed towards drinking water suppliers. We've already done a very similar session with drinking water assessors last week, so you should be seeing a bunch of the same training that they've received around the annual survey. So hopefully on a pretty similar page come the end of the session in terms of what Drinking Water Online is kind of there for, what it can do, and kind of the expectations around annual survey time in terms of who should be entering what information and when. As Michael said, if you have any questions, please shout them out in the chat. We'll have little breaks as we kind of go through to answer some pertinent questions on relevant sections. And yeah, if we can't get around to your question, we will still be contactable after this training, and we'll endeavour to answer your questions in the future. So first things first is just a bit of a heads up around the annual survey. So I'm hoping most of you know this is coming up, but just as a bit of a refresher, the annual survey for drinking water starts on the 1st of July. So there will be on that date, a bunch of surveys created within Drinking Water Online to be populated by the drinking water suppliers and kind of alongside with the drinking water assessors audits of these surveys. It is then we do a data review with ESR in terms of the to ensure consistency of the surveys, and all kind of going towards the kind of end product with the Ministry of Health of putting out the annual report of drinking water. As always, if you need support or assistance, please contact the support email for Drinking Water Online. This is for various different purposes, such as actually just getting access to Drinking Water Online, updating your supply details. So this is something that should ideally be done before the survey kicks off. So it's something you can do while before the survey starts, is just making sure all of those things are up to date. In a bit of a nutshell, the annual survey is spread across 3 different survey types within Drinking Water Online. So there is a zone survey, there's a plant survey, and finally a supply survey, where each of these surveys has 4 main sections with them. And this year we have reports associated with each survey. So I'll be diving into each of these in a deeper fashion going forward. So won't go heavily into them at the moment. So I'll run through the site with you. But just as a quick overview, the setup section is really around for suppliers to confirm the status really of their supply structure. So it's things around like population and what compliance criteria, things that really govern what the criteria for sampling throughout the year will be for your supply. Monitoring again is targeted at suppliers, so it's actually entering a bit of the information around your sampling and your compliance for the year. So it's really a method of putting forward your case for compliance. The next section is the audit section. So that's what the drinking water assessors fill in after reviewing the monitoring section. And then finally is the national section, which is done at an international level for the Ministry of Health to ensure that there is consistency across the sector. And then again, there's a new reports section, which I'll take you to as we get there, but really the idea around that is the ability to view compliance kind of as the surveys go, but again, I'll touch on that once we get there. So what's new this year? So reports, so this is for live compliance survey results. So instead of entering all your information previously, like you've done previously, and then having to wait a couple of months for, well, potentially a month for the results of your compliance to come back to you, this is now live calculated within the system. It is based on the drinking water assessors audit results, so it does require the drinking water assessors to enter their data, but it allows a much faster communication of kind of the expected compliance results, and allows you to slice and dice the results of it. We've now got some functionality that allows you to actually go view the samples, your test samples in a survey. So if it says that you've missed one, you can actually go and have a look where. You can now update plant processes within a survey, which I'll show you in a minute. And then finally, we've added some additional validation within the surveys. More of a drinking water assessor note, but still relevant, is that the 69Y and 69ZF questions related to the Health Act for drinking water, these are now explicit fields within the supply survey. So previously they were auto-calculated, but the calculation was quite situation dependent, and it having single fields for each of these made more sense going forward. So that's what we've got this year. Couple of things to watch is previously there's been a little bit of confusion around remedial action questions about whether to populate them or not. So just as a bit of a rule of thumb, if there's transgressions, there should be some commentary around remedial actions, whether they've been taken or not. And in terms of the compliance, given a bit of a cheat sheet in terms of where the actual compliance is governed from. So we'll be sending out both this document pack, as well as we're going to be posting a YouTube channel for Drinking Water Online with some instructional videos on some frequently asked questions, as well as frequent actions within the system. So a good example is uploading multiple test results. So we're going to upload an instructional video that shows you where you can go to find the information and how you can put together a spreadsheet so you can upload all of your samples in a bulk style to Drinking Water Online.
Just going to cut in there and look if there's anything else, any particular parts of Drinking Water Online that you'd like specific guidance on. Please just maybe put a message out on the chat, and we'll see if we can get a video on that piece as well. Chris, there's also been a question from Daniela. Are corrective action samples linked to transgressions in the compliance survey?
Yeah, so transgressions are and corrective actions are linked together in the annual survey. So something you'll see this year is that there'll be a transgressions table, and next to that there'll be a column for investigation. So that's really a way of identifying if there's been transgressions, have there been related investigations to those. So I'll be able to highlight that in a bit more detail as we go through the surveys, but in a nutshell, yes, there is a way of linking these together and getting the data pulled through.
I've got a question there, Chris. You talked about instructional videos on YouTube. So are they created yet, and how do people get access to them?
So they're in the process of being created. We're looking at releasing them within a week, and we'll be providing links to users within Drinking Water Online, but since it's going to be YouTube, anyone with the link can go and access those. So and on top of that, we'll also be embedding them within the site itself.
Okay, thank you.
Just on that note, I mean, this training and those videos are really intended for people who are using Drinking Water Online. We have a record of all users of Drinking Water Online from the registration. So if there are people on this call who aren't users of Drinking Water Online, it probably is worthwhile if this is relevant to you, if this is something you need to register as a user, and then you'll be able to receive those videos. And I'll just send out a link to our support email address to register.
All right. And finally, just around COVID-19. So it's been a challenging year for more than one reason, but around COVID-19. So providing a bit of guidance around if there have been impacts related to COVID-19 in your supplies, where you can actually record that information. So the ministry will be reviewing any kind of comments related to COVID and making some judgment calls depending on the situation. So if you have been affected or need to add some commentary around this, please add some comments in the monitoring notes section of the supply survey, and we'll be able to pick these up to use it as a bit of guidance around overarching compliance if it's been impacted or not. All right. Well, without further ado, we might get into the beast itself, which is Drinking Water Online. So, as mentioned before, there are 3 different survey types. So I'll just jump into the annual compliance part of the website. So, come July 1st, surveys for each of your supply components will be generated within the system. I have created some very imaginative supply components called Beca, Beca Wellington, and Beca Wellington Supply within the system for the purpose of this demo. So I'll be running you through each of these in terms of how to populate the surveys and how to then identify what compliance is going to be looking like for your supply. So first of all, I'll jump into the zone survey. So as each of these surveys, as mentioned before, have a setup, a monitoring, an audit, and a national section. So we'll tackle the setup section first, as it's really the foundation of the surveys. It has criteria that governs the compliance requirements. These include things like the population, so making sure that the population of your supply is up to date is really important in terms of ensuring that you're being assessed against the right criteria. This is all pulled through from the rest of the website, so please get in contact with support desk if these need to be updated, these values. So these are pulled directly from the zones in the different part of the site here. It also captures your supply structure. So something new that we've added this year is the ability to jump between different supply components and surveys. So you can actually go check out the survey for the related components in the structure just by clicking this button here. So if I wanted to go see what answer I had entered in the plant earlier, I can click on that and that will bring up the plant survey for the related plant. So jumping back to the survey, in terms of setup, so there's a snapshot which is pretty much pulled in from the rest of the website here. So this is something that pretty much immediately, if is out of date, you can go and update. You don't have to wait till the survey has been created. And I would definitely encourage you to. And the other part to set up is actually just entering in compliance criteria and a little bit of information about other things that are measured. So in this case, I've selected 6A E. coli for my criteria. And I've said, yes, the snapshot is up to date and it is complete. So I'm happy that that population is right. So after selecting setup is complete, this will take you through to the next stage. So going back up, it now shows that I've done my setup and I'm now through to monitoring. What it also does at this stage is it pulls through any related P2 determinants. So for this zone, I've added a fluoride determinant, which it kind of has a mini survey of itself within the annual compliance survey.
Chris, just a question from the floor. How do I update the population field? Do I have to wait until the survey starts? No, they should be updating that population field in the zone, correct?
Yes. So that currently the process for updating the population field or anything kind of related to the supply structure at the moment requires a submission. I forget what the form name is. It's like WSO1 for a supply structure change. So that can be something as simple as updating the population. Emailing through support at Drinking Water with any requests that you have around this. So these fields actually can't be, it requires admin access to update them. So please request any of these changes through the support email.
And that's something you should work with your drinking water assessor on as well. So to change those, we'll need the appropriate form signed off by you and your drinking water assessor. Graham has asked a question. How does it cope with your changed compliance criteria during the year? Two quarters using 2B and then 2 quarters using 2A. I think that might be a question we'd want to go to either the ministry or ESR on. Mm-hmm. Nicola, is that something you can comment? Or shall we maybe I'll just give Barry or Jan a message and see if they can comment on that as well. Chris, do you want to move on and we'll come back to that one?
Yep, no worries. So after completing the setup and ensuring that's all correct, the next part of the survey is monitoring. So this is really the heart of the survey in terms of providing evidence around compliance and really putting forward your case for compliance. So I've gone through and populated a few of these fields beforehand, but one of the major areas is around monitoring. So depending on what your criteria and population is, it will determine your monitoring and your required samples. So something new we've added this year is the ability to actually go and find the test results that relate to each of these. So what a survey will do is it will go through and say, you require 12 samples to be taken over the year based on your population and your criteria. Within the drinking water online system, we have found 40 samples that satisfy, or that have been for this zone for E. coli within this period. And so it automatically comes in and says, cool, we found 40, that's more than 12, so it complies. So it automatically populates all of these fields. If you've been unable to enter these samples within Drinking Water Online for some reason, you can actually come in and update the actual value yourself and provide a bit of comment around it. It's preferred that it's all within the site, as it makes auditing a lot easier, but there is the ability to come in and manually update a value. All samples by a recognised lab, in this case I've chosen Cawthon, and this is the part I've discussed earlier around transgressions. So for these samples I had a transgression, so it's pulled that through from the system. For that transgression, I've linked an investigation. So it's pulled through and saying, yes, there has been a transgression and yes, it has been investigated. The DWAs will probably want to dig into this a little bit further so they can actually go and find this transgression and investigate it within the system. But this is just really a quick heads up around what has been completed. And in this case, I'm going to say it's allowable. So in terms of linking to the test results, say if I had a maximum interval, say required of 45, but the calculated was 46, and I couldn't for the life of me think where the sample I would have taken would have missed the mark, you can actually open up this link to test results. What this will do is it will take you to the samples page, where it's automatically filtered it for everything within the survey. As part of these tables, you are able to select additional columns. So one of the new columns that we've added is a days since previous column. What this will do is it will tell you how many days it's been since the previous sample of that determinant. So you can arrange this to see where your samples might have been amiss in terms of days between samples.
Chris, just a question from Danielle. So since only monitoring samples count towards compliance, is it possible to update the sample purpose in Duo and then recalculate the relevant survey for the affected supply and therefore get the E. coli monitoring results updated for samples up?
It is. So within these surveys, there is a recalculate results button. So this will effectively go and try repull the info in. To update the sample purpose from what it was previously to monitoring, there's a couple of different ways you can do it. Probably the nicest way is under importing multiple samples, there is an override functionality, and actually it's probably worth showing you that now. So going to the import multiple samples page, one of these links here will take you to the overwrite multiple samples tool. So this is something is available in the solution, but we try to not make it the first stop. We try to do it normally, but you can go to an overwrite utility. So you can upload the same spreadsheet as you may have previously uploaded, except with monitoring as the purpose. That will go and update all of the samples within the system. Then you'll be able to come back in and recalculate results, and it should pull in all these newly updated samples.
Hope that answers the. Go ahead,
ties in with another question as well out there from Vicky. Can't pronounce her last name. Deirdrix. Is what do you do if you have two different laboratories for a compliance year? Would you use the same process for that as well, Chris?
In terms of the recognised lab used?
Yeah.
Yeah, so at the moment it only captures one. There is the ability to, I would recommend choosing the the one that's taken the majority of the samples if it's not a 50-50 split, and just adding a mention in the notes field saying that there have been 2 labs used.
And look, just for those of you who didn't catch the comment from Barry around Graham's question around changing compliance criteria through the year. So it's really up to use the primary compliance criteria used, make notes on the rest, and then the DWA can mark that off accordingly.
Awesome. And just to reassure you, if you're feeling rushed with any of this, we will be uploading videos effectively describing this annual survey process to the YouTube channel and distributing it so you can go through them at leisure in your own time. So progressing through the monitoring section, there's a few questions around each of these that are answered. So it is really about going through each of these stages and entering questions if they're applicable. So for this stage, I'm going to say that even though I've got no monitoring for total coliforms within the system, I'm going to say I did have these and say, hopefully, which won't be the case, but I was unable to upload these samples due to my Microsoft Excel expiring. Again, I can say they're all taken by a recognised lab. In terms of seasonal population, there'll be a few questions like this throughout the survey that are trying to identify any corner cases that have occurred.
You got to select your lab, Chris.
I've got to select a lab. All right, MedLab Timaru is my friend.
Next question. There is no compliance criteria for totals, so why is there a transgression field for totals?
So this will always be 0 throughout the system. It's just something that's automatically calculated with each determinant. It's something that's that should just tick through. So yeah, I'd recommend that totals are, in terms of transgressions, they can not be ignored, but in this case, it's always going to be 0, so it's going to be trivial to pass by anyway.
There's another question there too, Chris, about entering lab results when they come in PDF format rather than CSV.
Yeah. That is something that there's probably a few different ways to cut that one. It's you could take the painstaking way of entering them manually. So there is the option to not only upload it CSV, you can upload samples manually. Or personally, if I got a PDF of results, you can convert those. You can open PDFs typically with Microsoft Word, and it will try structure them a bit better and then try to copy and paste it into an Excel document.
And look, I would say that might be one of those cases where you're entering the numbers in here into the annual survey, and then if you've reviewed those PDF results with your drinking water assessor and they're comfortable with those, then potentially those actual individual samples don't need to be loaded in Drinking Water Online.
I'll put another one out there as well. If the people are actually paying the laboratories for the results, then they can dictate of what format they want the results in, which might be both CSV and PDF.
Yep. So yeah, thanks. Which I said, Corfram can send you a CSV along with the results. They do that for you. And so there's the importer tool that allows you to translate those into a format that can be imported. I always say that PDFs is where data goes to die. So.
All right, so the next part of the monitoring is around remedial action. So there's a single remedial actions question that kind of spans all of the determinants in this monitoring section. So this section is for both answering remedial actions around both the E. coli and, well, in this case, coliforms, but it's not really applicable. So in this case, we did have a transgression and an investigation related to E. coli. So I'm going to say yes, we did take a remedial action. And in this case, it was sufficient, and then just a little bit of commentary around the remedial action. So I believe it was sufficient, as the tool was found to be broken. See investigation. Just as a quick note, please don't take my comments verbatim in this. It's very much data to enter in here. I'm sure you've got a lot better explanations behind things. And finally, around monitoring, it's a bit of confirmation around that all the information you've entered in is as you expected. This is really a double check before progressing to the next section, because in the audit section of the survey, it's you will be unable to enter the data, and if you need to update anything, you'll need to contact your drinking water assessor to get them to unlock the monitoring section again. There's been a bit of chat about this, as it can cause a little bit of frustration having to bounce back between the two parties. But at the moment, in terms of auditability, there needs to be some way to lock the results so that they don't kind of change under the drinking water assessor's nose. So in this case, I'm going to claim compliance, add in any notes that I find relevant, and then say, yes, I'm happy that my monitoring is complete. There is a follow-up section just as a bit of a broader monitoring questions as well. So were there any boil water notices, some Pueblo solvency questions, and again, some additional monitoring notes. So I'm happy that there's nothing additional I need to add in here. And what that will do is, after selecting that final monitoring is complete, it will take me through to the audit section of the overall survey. You'll see that the P2 part of the survey is still in the monitoring stage. This is because it's effectively, it's a mini survey within a survey. So if we drop down to the P2 section, you'll see there was very similar questions to what we were entering in the kind of overall monitoring section around, gives you some requirements, it pulls through some calculated values. There's a little bit of, there's a few questions around MAV and maximum concentration found. So these are pulled in from the system typically. Again, remedial action questions and the ability to progress to an audit stage.
So Chris, we had a question from Vicky around uploading documents to investigations, of whether we would be able to do that in the future. I don't believe that's a functionality now, is it?
No, it's not currently a functionality. It has been highlighted as something to add in the future to be able to tie up that audit trail a bit more.
Be great if that would be something useful to anyone else on that call, just to maybe sort of mention that in the chat now. And I guess, would it be more valuable to have it in the survey, or have it in the investigations section of Duo?
Just to touch on the audit section quickly. So this is typically filled out by the drinking water assessors. However, this is where the information that governs compliance is going to be extracted from. So there's a field, or a couple of fields in here that are going to govern the compliance of the survey. So one of the main ones is complies with the drinking water standards. So for the bacterial section of the drinking water standards, this question is going to govern whether it passes or fails. So the drinking water assessor is going to use the information that you've provided in the monitoring section, effectively the case that you've put down for yourself for compliance, and then assess whether they believe you comply or not within this period, and whether they provide any lenience or not. So this is just a bit of a heads up in terms of if your supply is compliant or non-compliant, this is where the information is really being driven from. So it allows those conversations to happen.
Let's two questions have rapidly come in there, Chris. Can you please give more consideration to suppliers being able to unlock compliance sections? It's both time consuming and frustrating requesting this from the drinking water assessor. There is already a running log of who changed what when. Thanks, that's one comment.
Yeah, and it's something that actually we have highlighted that we are going to change. We, in terms of this year's survey, trying to cram in the ability was just a bit out of scope, but it's something that we're going to be looking at for sure next year, and it might actually come with a little bit of a change of how the survey is structured. So it might not be there are discrete drinking water assessor and supplier sections. There's a bit of an ongoing conversation about more of a collaborative approach to entering the data. So that's something. If you have any additional comments or recommendations around it, I'd love to hear that.
That'd be good. Yeah. The other question is can you actually export data out of drinking water online into Excel?
Yes, there is. So on all of the pages that you see these tables and grids on, there is an export to Excel button attached to it. So coming to the samples page, so this is the one I was linked to off the survey, so I can see all my survey results. I can then ask it to dump all this data to an Excel file, and that will download it to my machine.
Thanks. That was easy.
Might be worth just mentioning the column selects. I know we don't have them on this page.
Oh, yes. So
we do. Sorry,
we do. Yeah. So there are additional columns selects typically. So we try to make the pages as least cluttered as possible, but we do want you to be able to access all of the data you're entering in. So there's typically column selects related to most of these type of pages where you can come in and say, actually, I'm really keen to know what ones were finalised or which ones had negative health outcomes. So all of these are compliant. I think there is, if I filter, I will get the transgressions.
and you can also use this to cut down what actual columns you look at to make it a bit more succinct to you. We will get into the reports a bit later on, and that's another way of getting data out of the system.
Cool. So I'll quickly run through the P2 part in here, mainly in terms of the report, so we can have a look at it. But if I just come through here and say, I completely forgot to sample fluoride this year. I've not been responsible, and I'm willing to own up to it. Coming through saying didn't do any remedial actions because they weren't needed. I'm going to say no, I probably don't deserve chemical compliance, and that will progress this to the audit section where the DWO will come in and say, okay, thank you for being so honest with me. I'm going to have to mark that as a does not comply. So this survey has now gone through the supply entering all the information. The DWO has gone through. It's now in the national section whether it will be investigated by ESR to make sure that it's consistent nationally. But this is a really good time to actually go see the reports and what they can do around this. So there's a reports page that has a few different reports that uncovers a bit of information within Drinking Water Online, and also does a little bit of logic crunching. So if we open the zone compliance report, this will bring up a report powered by Power BI dashboards, which will show information for the drinking water zones that I'm able to see within the system. So as with the rest of the website, it's filtered to my supplier's information. So these reports will grab all the data from Drinking Water Online, and it will crunch a bit of the compliance based on the fields that have been entered. So it typically takes a second for this data to come through. But once it has, you are able to really dig into what has been entered in the surveys. Everyone's having a good think at the moment. Cool. So this is the survey that we've just entered for the Beca Wellington zone. So as you may remember, the bacterial compliance for that zone was marked as true, so that comes through to the survey, and the chemical compliance was marked as false. It also brings through a few failure reasons in terms of what was entered in the survey. So in this case, it said there was no samples for fluoride. The monitoring was marked as insufficient for fluoride against the requirements also, and there's no recognised lab used for fluoride, which kind of makes sense if there's no samples. So we've got this for all of the different supply component types within the system, where you'll be able to dive in and really have a check on what's passing, what's failing, and you can actually filter within these reports. So clicking on various columns or visuals will filter to whatever you select. So in this case, since I've only got one item, it's not particularly interesting filtering. So if I clicked on false, it would just filter everything that failed overall compliance. But since there's only one, it's just going to show the one. All right, so any additional questions, Michael?
No, I was actually going to, well, there was one suggestion coming from Colin, and it's a suggestion which is going to seem a bit familiar, just suggesting that compliance monitoring was open throughout the year rather than at the end, and it could be done on an ongoing basis, and then it would just be a case of recalculating results in sort of the year to date. Colin, that's certainly something we've been considering and something we're looking at for the surveying next year.
There's three other questions there as well, and one of them is linked to what you've just said there, Michael. So does a supplier can unlock the audit stage, how will drinking water assessors know that the zone compliance is ready for assessment?
And that's one of the challenges of if we're going to make it so the supplier can unlock those, is we'd have to manage that sort of workflow.
Yeah, and knowing that there's no post data still waiting to come through for compliance purposes. Yeah. Another question there, will the new changes to the annual survey be rolled over to the quarterly compliance sections also, i.e. linked to the test results and days since last sample?
Yes, so we're going to try and link these surveys up as much as possible. So everything that you can do in the annual survey, the goal is that you can do this in the quarterly survey to get all this power. And just to kind of tie into that conversation before as well, we're really looking forward at more of a continuous survey model, so not actually requiring these two different styles of surveys, being able to kind of enter throughout the year.
Yeah, and the same person also says also the ability to add all quarterly compliance zones, plants, etc. at the same time and not one by one, which is also time consuming.
Oh,
you load
yes.
them all en masse.
Cool.
So that's a future improvement that you're working on, would that be correct?
Adding en masse, actually that's not something we've identified before. It kind of ties into, if we link these together a bit more, it will come as part of the package being able to do that. But it's definitely something to note down, and any more feedback or feature requests like that, please send on through. We're always looking to engage with the end users a bit more in terms of what you actually need.
Yeah, so if people do have a list of requests or something, then by all means email them to myself or to Michael, and we'll make sure they go through.
Oh, look, probably my request is just to fire them straight off to that support email, and they're all going in the same place. And we're putting those into a product backlog that we sort of review and compare. So it's really good. Like when we hear the same requests from a number of different people, it's really good triangulation for us. So yeah, please keep those coming through. Nick has a curly question. We now have a Sector 10 supply. Can Duo manage Sector 10 supplies?
I personally don't know what a Sector 10 supply is.
Well, I'll jump in. This is Jan.
Thanks, Jan.
So I think Nick means a Section 10 supply. So it'll come under, So Mark's Palmer's replied and said, yes, it's under a participating supply.
Always good to have a friendly DWA on by to help out.
I see there's one supplier in the far north now too. It is, 5,000 consumers and solely done through tankers.
Hopefully this isn't a new normal.
Cool. So I'll jump into the next type of survey. So, which is the plant survey. It's very similar to zone. So I won't bore you in terms of going over the stuff that we've kind of already covered, but I will highlight the differences. And there's a few interesting parts with the plant survey, particularly around the protozoa monitoring section. So again, it has a setup, monitoring, and audit in the national section. In this case, I'll just select criteria 1 and say, yep, that's cool, that all sounds right. This, as with the zone survey, will progress me to the monitoring state. So, as with the zone survey, there is a bacterial monitoring part of the section or the survey. So in this case, I didn't have enough samples uploaded within Drinking Water Online to automatically select this complies checkbox. So this could be a potential use for going and checking out the test results and seeing, oh, actually I forgot to upload my results from September, say. But in this case, I'm going to say, actually, we just completely shut down for a month. In this case, we'll say, yeah, we couldn't send anyone out to sample. And so that's actually correct in terms of the samples taken. All via registered lab, population increase, no. We'll continue through.
Is that where you'd put your COVID response?
So the COVID response, ideally would look at, happy to have them in a few different places. So it's always nice to have notes actually next to a field. If there have been, if you wanted to explain it. In terms of an overarching response, there's capturing these in the kind of the highest supply level survey is where we've identified currently for a consistent place to put them, just because it could depend on what part of the survey you're wanting to attribute to COVID. But yes, I'd recommend if COVID has impacted, say you're sampling here, actually adding a little bit of notes around that. But I'll highlight the field at the supply level as well, that information about COVID should definitely go in if you feel like you've been impacted by it. So going through this monitoring section again, very similar to what we did in the zone. I can go down to remedial actions, add a couple of notes saying, no, we didn't have any transgressions, so that's fine. And let's say, no, I'm not going to claim compliance. So this is where you can add some additional notes if you want, saying COVID affected, just as a bit of a discussion, and finish that part of monitoring. So the next part of monitoring, which is specific to the plant surveys, is around this protozoa and plant processes section. So this is where all the log credits and disinfection types and sources, etc., come into play. Something that's new in this survey that we haven't done previous years is we've added the ability to actually update disinfection methods and sources, etc., within the survey itself. So previously, you would need to go and update these in the wider site, say in the plant, and then pull them through to the survey. However, now you can actually update these within the survey. However, there is a bit of a caveat with this, where the main purpose of why this has been added is to help with a bit of time efficiency, but we do ask that you do try and update these within the wider system if they have changed. So say if you have started using ozone as part of your disinfection regime, that not only within the survey, but within the plant itself, it is updated. it is an activity that you'll need to do alongside your DWA in terms of updating it within the website. So if what's being reflected in the survey isn't accurate, please update it within here, but also inform your DWA in terms of the need to update it within the more static supply structure.
Chris, we just had a question. In WINS, it was possible to add plant off periods, and compliance would be calculated based on the number of days the plant was running. Are there any plans to add that functionality? I don't believe so, but now that we've got that feedback, we can add it to the list. And look, if other people see that list and think that's a valuable thing, we can see if that gets prioritized.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
It's all about sort of identifying the enhancements that are going to add the most value to the most people.
Mm-hmm.
There's another question there too. If our system opted for online bacterial compliance in this compliance year, how would this be reported in Drinking Water Online?
Are you talking about continuous monitoring there?
For online bacterial compliance, it must be.
Yeah. Chris, did you cover that off already, or will you get to that?
In terms of continuous monitoring,
Yeah.
I don't think I've covered that off already. I do feel like there is a question, but off the top of my head, I would have to have a quick look at that. So it might be something to get back to.
Yeah. So I think from what I recall is continuous monitoring is just a sort of a single field, and we're not looking or wanting sort of all of the continuous monitoring data, but just sort of the summary of that information. And that's something to be sort of discussed with your DWA.
Cool. So going through and populating this plant and processes section, we've added a bit more validation around it. So if I said that we used mixed sources, but I forgot to say uncheck that we're also using all secure, this will ping me for it when I try to save it. So if we progress through and enter values for the rest of this, saying, yeah, I think we did, we can claim protozoa compliance and a couple of questions such as primary disinfection barrier. We can add in some information about this. So we say, cool, that's ozone, and don't worry about the filtration. We didn't have one. So we can say none. If operationally failed for some days, enter percentage for days met. So since we're saying that we claim compliance, don't worry about entering that. It didn't vary, and we had the COVID affected pulled in from earlier. So if I try to save this, it's going to ping me back saying, hey, you actually can't have mixed sources as well as all secure bore, please pick a lane. So I'll say, actually, we'll go all mixed sources. So in terms of the plant survey, that's the main difference in terms of the surveys as a whole. It's that protozoa section, and really there's questions around disinfection, etc. in there. These following sections, once completed, cause the survey to flow very similar to the zones where we're now into an audit section. Again, as with the zones, there's a few key questions in here that the DWAs will be populating, governing the compliance. In this case, it's drinking water standards for bacteria, so same as zones, there's a distinct one for bacteria, and there's also one for protozoa. And then again, it's to the national section. So I'll go and show the report just to highlight again that all this information is kind of bubbled up in these reports to identify the compliance. But as we're waiting for this, is there any additional questions, Michael?
None that have come up on my screen.
Okay.
No?
No.
There was Nick's explanation of what a Section 10 supply is. And that's for small suppliers serving less than 500 people that can opt for a full standard or a section that reduces the monitoring requirements if they have a water safety plan. Yeah.
Thanks
And
for that,
thinking
Nick.
yeah.
Super, thanks, Nick.
Yeah, there we know. And the other one with the bacteria online, thinking about that, there's also, this is more for treatment plants, but you can do it for distribution zones. I'm only aware of one utility that was, and they've bailed on the back to E. coli monitoring, but that was to do with continuous chlorine every 15 minutes with pH and turbidity, opting for that option instead.
Oh, instead of
E. coli
sampling.
monitoring.
Yes, so there is a question asking around whether you substituted disinfection monitoring for E. coli monitoring, I think is the wording.
Yeah.
Which will capture that. So if you answer yes to that, there will be a couple of follow-up questions in terms of was it all compliant, was it all good? We can just add in your answers there and any comments that you have. So pulling through all of these results from the plant survey that we've just completed, crunching some numbers, and before we get the line readout, it's looking pretty positive. So it's pretty much just highlighting what we just entered. Very surprisingly, I entered bacterial compliance as true, even though I didn't take a single sample all year. And so there can be a little bit of discrepancy between the failure reasons and compliance here if there is that mismatch in data. So when entering these surveys, please strive to be a little bit more consistent than I have been here. And protozoa compliance is true, so this is pulled through to the this plant survey. The final survey type, which doesn't have too many fields in terms of what suppliers are expected to enter, is just the overarching supply survey. So these supply surveys have a couple of more fields in terms of the supply snapshot, and the really important one to note here is around the water safety plan status and water safety plan date. So as with the other values within this box here, they're all pulled from other parts of the system. So in this case, under the supplies menu, if you go and open your supply, which you can actually link to here within the survey, it will, there is a section for water safety plans, which is populated by your DWA. So it pays to be in contact with them to make sure that they are aware of your water safety plans and what state they're in, because these are going to be pulled into the survey to govern your compliance. So there's a little bit of logic that goes into deciding which water safety plan is going to be pulled in. So in this case, I've got two. I've got one that I'm actually implementing, but we've got one in the future that's currently in draft. The survey, noticing that this one is future, ignores it and just pulls in this official one that we're currently implementing. So this is, again, something probably worthwhile checking on before annual survey time, making sure that these water safety plans are properly represented within the system. And if they're not, when these surveys are created, you might see that it's expired or it's or there isn't one at all. Again, it has links to related supply components. So if I jump to this zone, this is the zone we've just populated, and you can work your way all down the tree to the plant. So happy that my water safety plan is up to date and all my supply looks okay. I can say the setup is complete. This takes us to our monitoring section where add a bit more contact details. My contact name is Chris. Please contact me on 111. Please don't. I'll remove that. And finally, monitoring notes. So this is where we're really keen to highlight the COVID impact. So entering the COVID keyword here is what we're really going to be looking for in terms of if we're going through and trying to find, say, some trends, or if we're considering compliance around these supplies. So this is really since this survey is really the overarching one for the supply as a whole, this is where we've identified capturing COVID monitoring notes, where DWAs will also be doing something similar. in terms of what needs to be entered, that's kind of it in terms of the monitoring section. It's really just capturing some contact details for the supply and adding a bit of overarching notes around it. This will take us to our audit section as with the other surveys. So again, for drinking water assessors, where they can come in and for this survey, it's really all about the ACT question. So they come in and answer various different questions around the ACT. So there's, if people have been studious previously, they might notice there are 2 new ones in here this year. So we've added this duty to monitoring drinking water, so 69Y, as well as the duty to take remedial actions as discrete questions within the survey. And this is really to work towards the transparency of the results. So all of these values are going to be piped through effectively to the overarching compliance for ACT. So if you saw any of these flag up as no's or falses, you can expect that your supply is likely not going to fail the ACT.
There's 2 more questions there, Chris. This one is, can the water safety plan section, can you add more than 1 file now for, like if there's a treatment plant and you had an appendice to the file, can you then go and update it or add another file to it?
That's a good question. So you can definitely add 1, and this is if you can add more than 1. I think it's no currently, but I'd have to double check that. But it's good to know that that is a request.
Yep. And the other question that's out there is around P2s. Is it the drinking water assessor's responsibility for adding a new PD determinant onto this site, or is it the supplier's responsibility?
So it's a drinking water assessor's responsibility for adding the P2s to the site. So I don't think it's accessible to assessors. I don't think it's an option. I think you need to have an assessor role, but it is again something probably being in contact with your drinking water assessor about in terms of what should be in there, but they'll be the one ultimately putting it in.
Thanks.
Cool. So in terms of the supply as a whole, there's a report specifically for the supplies. This is a little bit more complicated than the zones and plants report, because it actually draws information from all of the related zones and plants for that supply to govern the compliance as a whole. So what it's going to be looking for is it's going to look at all the zones and plants related and see how they've performed against the drinking water standards, and then bubbling those results up to the supply as a whole. And this is the data that's really going to be going into the annual report appendix in terms of supplies and whether they've been compliant or not. So what you will see on this page is what you can really expect to see in the annual report in terms of compliance. We're really trying to make it a single source of truth around this, so you don't enter data and then get a different email with results. We're looking at containing both your evidence and the results all within one home, which is Drinking Water Online. So for this supply, just going back in our memory, we had bacterial compliance as true for both our zones and plants. Our plant was compliant for protozoa. We failed our chemical compliance for our zone because we didn't take any fluoride measurements, so we're expecting that to come up as false, and that's what you can see here. So this has pulled through all of the data and done a bit of crunching in terms of compliance, and so you'll see a row per supply that is part of your overarching organisation. So for this one, it's just the single supply, and going across it, it has an overall drinking water standards compliance of false because it failed at chemical compliance, but it has an overall ACT compliance of true because all of those questions in the supply survey were marked as compliant. And this is really where we're hoping a lot of the insight and ambiguity can be overcome in this year's survey, where where you can see your results almost as immediately as they're in the system in terms of the expected compliance. There's always a couple of corner cases, so there's always going to be a couple of conversations where compliance might need to be changed, but for the lion's share of the results, the goal is that you can see your compliance almost as soon as it's available. And that's kind of in terms of the survey. There was a couple of other activities you'll likely need to be performing during this annual survey period, mainly around entering samples and bulk importing, etc. Potentially adding some investigation notes into the system. In terms of guidance around that, this is where we're going to be looking at uploading some guidance videos to the YouTube channel, which we'll distribute, which will provide you kind of an example of how to perform these activities. And as always, we are contactable. Please contact us via the support email if you have questions or queries. It's we're happy to assist.
Look, maybe just before we move on too much, I mean, these reports are hopefully going to be a significant change in some of the workflow. So as soon as you've filled out your details and those have been run through the DWA, they'll still go through the national sort of review process and data validation and verification. But there's only sort of going to be one single source of truth, and that's what's in Drinking Water Online. So it won't be necessarily, there shouldn't be too many surprises as it goes through the process. Would really love to get your feedback on these dashboards as we go through, and if there's other statistics and other analysis that would be really valuable to you, please do let us know. One of the conversations with the drinking water assessors is how might this sort of reduce the amount of effort it takes to produce the compliance reports that they provide for the water suppliers, and potentially you can get even more valuable insights from the data. And this is hopefully also going to drive some new analysis that's going to be conducted in the annual report. Are there any questions? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to mention, and as with other parts of the website, you can actually extract this data for your own use. So there is the ability to export data from these tables within these reports. So this actually just allows you to download it as an Excel file, so you can export it for your own purposes as well. Are there any questions, Michael?
None coming from me. I think some are going to Noel only, but Noel, are there any that have come through to you?
No, some of the chat and some of the question and answer sessions have sort of been tag teaming in between us, but no, there's none on the. We're up to date with all the questions at the moment.
So I'm sure there's probably someone out there typing furiously, but so I'll give it a second. But again, like this isn't a one-shot opportunity. Like if you do have questions, please be in contact. And we will also try to provide additional guidance kind of going forward. So if there's kind of big questions found, we will send out some comms around some suggested actions around them.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we've had a really great turnout from this webinar. I'm actually sort of quite amazed. We've probably sort of almost got 20% of all registered users, so it's probably about twice the number of actually active users. So if organizing a webinar like this is much easier than trying to get everyone together in a single room and somewhere in the country or throughout the country. So if there is value in running sort of focus sessions like this again, potentially sort of looking at some of this analysis through the reports, or looking at reviewing new functionality, or even sort of potentially new functionality or functionality we're looking to explore, please let us know how you'd like that engagement to continue.
Yep, and Water New Zealand will be happy to host another session if that's what members were after. So yeah, that's no problems doing that at all.
Sorry, big shout out to Noel as well. Thanks.
Well, and the team behind me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Renee.
Yeah. There is 3 more questions that popped through. Is Water Outlook data able to be entered into the report?
Yes, it can be entered into the report currently via the bulk importer, as previously mentioned. So there is if you can, there's no direct link currently in terms of push a magic button. You will have to export the data as an CSV file and then upload it to Drinking Water Online. In terms of samples, I'm guessing that was the question.
Yep. The two more questions. One's a good curly one. I'll leave that to last. Can Drinking Water Online be used to track system performance quarterly?
System performance quarterly. Yes. So these surveys can you can choose the survey type, so you can go annual or quarterly. Currently, there's no quarterly data, but for the survey, but it can allow you to look at your quarterly results. Currently, it's only showing the audited results. So if there's unaudited quarterly results, they are not being exposed, but we do have a request around those that we're looking into.
Yeah, a lot of councils have quarterly reports back to councillors and so on, so it'd be good to track, include quality as part of that, and how they're complying. Imagine that's what's coming from. The last good curly question is, will Drinking Water Online be the weapon of choice for tomato ROI?
Is that from you, Jim?
No, it wasn't. I don't think Jim's online.
Tomato ROI, unless I've missed something, is still in its establishment phases. We've certainly had conversations with them. I'm aware they're still sort of looking at what their operating model is going to be and evaluating how Drinking Water Online is going to be integrating with that. I'm not sure if we have anyone from the establishment unit on the line.
Not that I'm aware of, but they're rapidly growing. Renee and I are meeting with them tomorrow. There'll be an update in pipeline tomorrow of just what the latest news and where Tomato ROI is at. About 2 weeks ago, there was 25 employees within Tomato ROI, so that they're rapidly recruiting and growing. I know one of the initial concepts was that reporting would be automated and done all internally within Tomato ROI, but we're talking over a year ago, so I don't know whether the thinking's still there or not. And saying that, we're almost a year away today. I'll be the 1st of July before Tomato ROI takes over from Drinking Water Assessors and Ministry of Health. So we've at least got this system for another year. And then there's that transition period if they were to change. So I don't think there's a lot of thought going and too much thinking going into this stage. It's very early on, so don't know the answer to that one.
Cool. And actually probably something worth mentioning that a few of you may have seen before or be interested is the public website. So there have been a bit of comms going out around a public website going live for Drinking Water Online to unveil a bit of this information to the public in a more easily accessible way. The plan, that is still the plan. It has been delayed a little bit because of current events, but still likely after this year's annual survey now, since we're up to this fun point in time in the water sector. After that, we will still be looking at rolling out the public website, which will be powered by the information in here. So the idea is most of the information that you've seen here this is the data that's going to be informing the public website. So making sure this is right ensures that when the information is disseminated, it is all as expected.
That's the location-based website with options where you type that this is a suburb or this is your street address and is your water compliant here.
That's correct. So given that boundary files have been supplied for your supply, which you may have gotten a few barrage of emails about, users will be able to say, yes, I reside at the Beehive, what is the compliance of my water, and it will look up the corresponding supply within the system, which may or may not be Wellington-based, and provide the latest compliance information around that.
Colin, has thought been given to making available data from DOE, making data available from DOE for analysis by suppliers or the public? It'd be interesting to compare total collectable or E. coli trends across suppliers. Yes, thought has been given. I guess a lot of that really depends on how suppliers feel about that. we're sort of very much aware that that it is supplier data in some respects. So and making sure that we're publishing that in a way which is constructive for the whole sector. So I think that's maybe a conversation we can start having as we move forward with the public website, and there will be an opportunity where we share that with the wider group of users before we go live.
Well, thank you. I think that concludes the session that's going on. If people are already keen to have another one, then let us know, and we'll try and make that happen. I guess those that are on it probably aren't want to do it again, but if your colleagues do, and there's enough people to come through, then I think this is personally quite a good way to reach out to a lot of the industry very quickly. You'll really end up people turning up to webinars that perhaps wouldn't be able to get out of the office and travel otherwise, especially in this current environment. So maybe the way of the future as well for us. But yeah, I'd like to thank Michael and Chris for demonstrating and participating in this. It's great. Thank you for doing that.
No worries, it's been a pleasure.
Pleasure. Thank you all.
Yep.
And please reach out